Welcome to Conquering Your Clownfish, a podcast dedicated to transforming disabilities into special abilities. I'm your host, Brady Murray. Welcome to the Conquering Your Clownfish podcast. Our special guest today is Courtney Morey. She's coming to us from Fort Worth, Texas, where she resides with her husband, Spencer, and their two amazing kids, with one on the way. Courtney is the founder of Annie Louise Foundation, a nonprofit resource hub that provides support for medical and disability parents. Her story for starting this nonprofit began when her daughter, Annie, was born with Down syndrome. This experience opened their hearts and minds to the disability community, and things haven't slowed down since. Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, let's just start. I would love to hear about your story. If you could start there.
Okay. 4 years ago, I was pregnant with Annie. And it's funny because I'm pregnant again now, and their due dates are almost the same, just 4 years apart. So it's like these parallels of what I'm experiencing right now is like the same seasons, the same similarities. It's just a very different world than summer of 2020. So we got a call that the NIPT results that there was a 62% chance that Annie would have Down syndrome. And that is what began all of this. I don't know how much we want to focus on Annie's diagnosis, but shortly thereafter, we learned about her heart condition, and that is really what sent me into, I guess, advocacy mode and that medical mom mindset. And I quickly went from, fears, concerns about Down syndrome to, okay, what do I need to do to get her the best healthcare and navigate this for our family? So during my pregnancy, I had a lot of support and resources thanks to other fellow moms that I connected with through DSDN. I have so much to thank that organization for. And yeah, Annie's, 50% of children with Down syndrome will have a congenital heart defect. Of those 50, half will need surgical intervention. And that was us. And we had AVSD, which is a more common heart defect. But Annie's was just really complicated. It wasn't the straightforward in and out within 5 to 10 days of recovery. That wasn't us. She had an unbalanced AVSD and pulmonary hypertension. Because of that, things went really badly after her heart was repaired. Her body just didn't respond well to the repair. Anatomically, her heart was corrected, but the pulmonary hypertension almost took her from us. And we had a very intense, difficult road with her recovery. And that is what, even though it was some of the hardest days of our lives, it's now I'm able to look back almost 4 years later and see all of the good that really has come from it. And just the experiences that I've lived as her mom in the medical setting, things that I couldn't forget, making mental notes of when another mom and dad caretaker go through this, I want to help make it just a little bit easier. And so that's really the drive behind the Annie Louise Foundation. I think there's a lot of wonderful resources for the Down syndrome community as far as like general advocacy and social support, different things. But when it comes to medical, it's just not quite as glamorous. It's a lot harder. But the truth is, when you have a child with Down syndrome, there will be varying needs for support, whether it's just certain therapies or, multiple other co-conditions that can come with the diagnosis. And so, been able to connect with, at this point, probably over 1,000 families and offer all kinds of support, the website, social media, podcasts like that.
Tell me more in relation to the foundation, and so specifically around that type of support that you are providing, because you're right, that's one blessing that we have in the Down syndrome community is there are a lot of resources, but you have found an area where those resources were limited. And share with us how you're doing that or how you're helping these families.
It can feel a little bit overwhelming. Most days I'm like, where do I start? What do I focus on? What do I work on? Because there's so much. And the foundation really isn't limited to just children with Down syndrome, because in our journey with Annie, we've encountered families with all kinds of disabilities where there's just overlap. Maybe their kid doesn't have a heart defect, but they also had dysphagia and they've had to have swallow studies, but they're neurotypical. And there's a lot of beauty in that, because then you're able to connect with all kinds of people. It becomes open and not just Down syndrome, and that's just the reality of it. But with the foundation, there's been small projects, and then there's the big stuff. And we launched in September, so we're less than a year old. But I'm really proud of the progress that we've already made so far. So one of the programs we have going right now is our adaptive onesie program, where families, if their child's about to have an upcoming surgery or they're experiencing a very long NICU stay, PICU, CICU, in those circumstances, it's almost impossible to dress your baby because there's so many lines and leads and wires and ports and everything. So for Annie, for months, she just laid there in a diaper. And that was hard for me as a mom. I know that you might think that clothing is something that's not that important, but there's just this innate desire as a mom to dress your baby, especially my little girl. And so I looked and I looked for adaptive clothing and I couldn't find what I needed. And about a year after her open heart surgery, I connected with a company out of Austin, Texas called Spoonie Threads. And now we've sent over 100 adaptive onesies that are exactly what I was looking for Annie, to babies all over the U.S. so that they can be a little more comfortable during their recovery from whatever surgery. So that's one of our projects that I'm proud of.
That's a great example, by the way.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's something that's small but big.
But one thing that I see often on your social that I wanted to ask you about is this saying that I think you should trademark, because this is like all you. Advocating is the new influencing. Tell me more about what that means and why that's so important to you.
All of the social media stuff was never something that I sought out or even anticipated. It was actually my older sister. When everything was happening with Annie, she asked me to make my account public so that information could be more easily shared. And when I did that, it just kind of blew up because of really just the miracle that Annie's story was. Yeah, it was a bit of a bizarre time, but it was beautiful because there was so much support and positivity and love that came. And then my focus in the beginning was just sharing the reality of what it's like to go through that recovery, and really the beginning of advocacy. And from there, it's just kind of steadily grown, and advocating is the new influencing, I guess, trying to communicate that what I share on Fancy Like Annie is,
by the way, love.
It's first and foremost, I just want to keep my priorities straight. I think that it's easy in the world of social media to get distracted with things that don't matter, and I don't ever want to be that. I want to authentically share what it's like to raise Annie and let it be a platform where other parents can be encouraged and get information.
Mm-hmm. There's a post that you shared that I want to talk about that talks about an experience that you had at a dinner. Can you hear about that?
It was actually a big social sort of fundraiser event in Fort Worth. And it was one I'd been to before. The sorority I was in, they put it on, and it's all about interior design. It's very frilly. It's really fun and beautiful, but the beginning of the event, all of the women just sit in this huge room in this country club. And I was seated next to this woman who I'd never met before. She was from out of town. And then another woman who I knew. So we were just catching up. And I had just shown both of them a photo of Wells and then of Annie. And then I told the woman who I knew, I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant." At the time, it was new. I was still in the first trimester. And, she was like, "Oh, congratulations." She's wonderful. I used to babysit her children. The woman I didn't know, she just had this look of disdain on her face. And she said, "Did the doctors not warn you to not get pregnant after what happened with your daughter?"
Wow.
I mean, just saying it out loud I went into like kind of stoic advocacy mode that unfortunately, you know what it's like where we have to go into that, I guess, so we don't explode. And I said, "Oh, I just stuck to the facts. Actually, Down syndrome, when I got pregnant with Annie, these were I went over the statistics. I said I had just as much of a chance as having a child with Down syndrome at 34 now as anyone else. And, if we do have another child with a diagnosis or a disability, I've experienced so much beauty from my daughter. I would think I would know what to do." And I honestly don't remember after that. I started getting upset towards the end once I really thought about what she just said. But then I had to sit there for 60 minutes and just stew in that, and it's like you can be prepared with all the right answers, but that doesn't mean that it's going to hurt less. And that's just the reality of it,
Well, just the emotion of everything as you're processing that. And I can't even imagine it's a person you have not met or that you've really not got to know. And then for them to say that, and by the way, how you handled it, like hats off to you. I think there's probably the answers that we all want to say and the reactions that we all want to say, and like, good on you for maintaining composure and processing that. But then to sit there next to this individual for the next hour and process that was hard. I can only imagine how hard that must have been. And so looking back on that though now, and there's been some space and time between that, what are your thoughts about that now, looking back on that experience?
I guess just that the woman who said it, I would guess she was somewhere in her 60s. And it's just a generation. Their social norms for people with disabilities were completely different than what we know today. And I try to not hold resentment towards that woman, because if she knew Annie, if she spent 1 hour with her, she would have never said that. So this is a person who clearly has lack of personal experience with people with Down syndrome. And so I tried to have grace for that. I've decided at this point, 3.5 years in, I just can't hold on to resentment, or I would not make it, especially running the foundation. You're basically putting yourself out there asking for it.
Yep.
And so I guess the good to come from it is that I did write about that. I did share that experience. And my hope is that maybe it made some people, no matter what generation you are, no matter how young or how old, think about why saying that is backwards and wrong. So,
well, you think if that lady had a grandchild that has Down syndrome, that conversation would have been completely different, because you're exactly right. All it would have taken, and it's not even necessarily a grandchild, even if they would have just spent an hour with Annie beforehand and then met you, and she knows your daughter, and maybe she was like caretaker for an hour or whatever, her perception and perspective would have been completely changed. And so I do agree that there should be grace given, because this is a generation, and not even just that generation, but all generations. There's a lot of individuals that simply don't have exposure to an individual that has a disability like Down syndrome. And so there's a preconceived idea as to what the societal norm should be. And that's exactly why we are doing what we're doing. It's why you have your foundation. It's why you share so openly on social media. It's why we do this podcast. This is the reason why we do this, because we know the secret. We know truly what these children have inside of them. And those people that know that too wouldn't trade it for the world. It truly is a superpower that these kids have, that these individuals have, that have Down syndrome, that have a disability. It's a very special thing that has the ability to change hearts and change minds. And so hats off to you for how you handled that and how you've leaned into it. And so I would love to come to where we are today. So you're expecting a child. You're
Yeah.
going through and into the same season as you brought Annie into this world, and you're experiencing all these appointments and emotions and thoughts. Would love to hear what your feelings are right now with your child that you're expecting right now and the experiences that you're having.
Yeah, this is very real time. It's fun to talk about something that's happening right now as we live it. Yeah, another reason I'm excited that we're getting to have this conversation delayed is because we had our 20-week anatomy scan last week, the week before, I forget. And funny enough, Annie had to come to that appointment with me and Spencer. She hasn't been to any of my OB appointments up to that point. And so I guess my emotions going into that anatomy scan, what I do in the day-to-day supporting medical families, it was hard to not just almost expect they're going to see something. There's going to be something in the scan that they see, and I just need to be ready for that. And then I need to research it. That like that's just how my brain works now, because I go to so many doctor appointments for Annie, and I see echoes of hearts that are not typical hearts, etc. I don't know. It was this weird combination of prepared, but also nervous. But more than anything, just thinking back to what it was like from Annie's anatomy scan. And that was the very end of February 2020. We were maybe 5 weeks or so into the pandemic. They would not let Spencer be with me. And I knew that they were going to be looking for a CHD with the Down syndrome diagnosis. And it's just really painful memories. Has nothing to do with, Annie. It was just the time that the world was in, and really the lack of humanity, because the whole thing was just painful. So going into this scan, I have a different OB now than I did with Annie because of the way that news was delivered and the way, I changed doctors. So what I didn't know going into that appointment is that I knew that the two different doctors were in the same building, but I had not paid attention to the proximity of their offices. And when they sent me for the scan to a different office or like a different room, I was so busy, holding Annie, talking to Spencer. They sent me to my previous OB's office.
Wow.
That's where the sonographer was. I didn't even realize. So we're getting started on the scan, and the sonographer is so kind, so wonderful. And my new OB had hand selected her, so I knew that it was going to be good. And Annie was just being so funny and talkative and sweet, which was a little unexpected because she has a lot of medical anxiety. If she goes into a doctor's office, if people are wearing scrubs, she knows, and she is very anxious, very upset. And she was just chatting it up with the sonographer, making all of us laugh. And so the sonographer is like, okay, we're looking at the heart. And she was like, okay. And I, at this point, I know how to read, I see all 4 chambers. And she was like, yep. And I said, do you see all the valves? And she was like, they're all there. So I'm just processing that. And Annie said she needed to go use the potty. She's in the middle of potty training. So Spencer leaves with Annie. And the stenographer I've held it together at this point. I haven't cried. The stenographer starts crying, talking about how beautiful she thinks Down syndrome is. So that just sent me that I, just silent tears, taking it all in. And I shared with her a little bit about what my anatomy scan with Annie was like and how healing this was, because it felt so positive and uplifting and healing. And Spencer comes back with Annie, and then we pretty much wrap up. She sends me on my way to go back to follow up with my OB, and we are walking out, and Spencer says, "Courtney, Dr. Blank was standing outside of the door and heard you share about your anatomy scan with Annie."
Really?
And receiving her diagnosis. That whole appointment was just really wild. It was a lot of things, but I didn't even know I was in his office. So then I walk out with Annie on my hip, and he's right there. It was wild. So
as I hear this, I just see tender mercy after tender mercy. One, the grace and the healing that transpired as a result of that appointment, and what a kind professional that you are working with. But what a tender mercy that physician, that OBGYN, could hear firsthand without having to be told directly, but hearing firsthand the impact that diagnosis was for you and how that was delivered. And my hope is that he has the humility to see how he could improve and how he could do better, because there most definitely will be another opportunity for him to be able to be in that situation again. And so I know that probably wasn't like ideal for you to get to see him be in his office and everything else, but what a tender mercy that is for him to be able to have that news delivered. The other thing that I feel impressed to say is, for our listeners that are listening to this, most likely you know a medical professional that would be in a situation that could be delivering news of this nature. And I would encourage you to share this podcast with them. Share this experience, this firsthand experience of a mom who received that diagnosis and the impact that that had on her, and also a mom who had the complete opposite, the 180-degree opposite of what she experienced with her next child. And so I would encourage you to share this podcast with that medical professional and just encourage them to listen to it, because I think it's going to help a lot of moms in the future to be able to have an experience like the second experience as they hear this firsthand.
yes, I agree.
So I have one more question for you before we wrap up today. When with families that have a child that has Down syndrome and they have other children, 99 times out of 100, that child is the cutest one and the one that's probably going to get the most social media time and kind of that rising star. And Annie is very much that case. But I have to say, Wells is something else. That boy is amazing. So Wells is Annie's older brother. And I would encourage our listeners to go and check out Wells and the kind boy that he is, and just that tender heart, and what an amazing big brother he is to Annie. So my question is, I would love to hear how Annie has influenced. So we see how Annie has influenced you for the good, but how has Annie influenced Spencer and Wells?
Oh man, it's so hard to even say. It's for Wells, it's all he's ever known. So there's no version of him that is like, for me, there's the prior to Annie, Courtney, and then there's the post.
Yep.
And there's all the things I didn't know, and now all the things I do. And the beautiful thing for Wells is it's just innate. It's a part of his everything. And ironically, I talk about this all the time. When we got the call and the OB told me, "I'm so sorry. I know this is something that no parent ever wants to news that they ever want to receive," my immediate first thought was Wells, and just the wave of, oh my gosh, he is not going to have the playmate that I thought he would, all the childhood memories. So absurd because I couldn't ask for more with my children. I couldn't ask for a more beautiful connection and love. And I think that Wells, regardless, is just a very tender, empathetic little person. And he was just clearly designed to be Annie's brother and to be patient through so much that our family has been through. Annie's health is, in a completely different place now, and there's less strain on him. But, we're getting to those years where she's not going to be a baby or even a toddler anymore, and there's going to be more social interactions. And I just see him getting ready for those. And he's just so proud of her. And he's so naturally inclusive. I don't have to teach Wells the definition of inclusion. Like I have to, talk with adults about. He's just a little model of what it is effortlessly. And then for Spencer and I went to the same college. We both went to TCU. We didn't know each other. He was in a fraternity, and their focus in philanthropy was disabilities. So the school that Annie attends now, the preschool Kinderfrogs, it is a preschool for children with Down syndrome. It's exceptional. He spent all of his college years volunteering there.
Wow.
A lot of time with little ones with Down syndrome. I was the total opposite. So typically, in my experience with families who have received a diagnosis, it's not the husband comforting the wife or, sharing information or relational things. And in our case, it was. And his experience there changed my mental health during my pregnancy. It really set the tone. And it's very full circle that Annie's at school there now. But yeah, I mean, he's just right there with me. He supports me in all of my dreams for the foundation because he loves Annie so much.
What a beautiful, tender mercy. You look at Spencer and that preparation that came to him prior to even being a father that has a child that has Down syndrome. And then you look at Wells. I completely agree that this is a boy that has a heart for this, that this is a natural thing for him. And he truly is an unstoppable advocate, even at a young age. Excited to see where he goes. And it's hard not to see just that divine hand guiding your family and the work that is being transpired as a result of that. And so I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for the work that you're doing for the Down syndrome and disability community.
Thank you for having me so I can share all of these things and hopefully reach more families.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Conquering Your Clownfish. If you liked what we discussed on the podcast today and want to continue the conversation, please visit us at conqueringyourclownfish.com. And please don't forget to subscribe.